Coming up next, the saga of four guys from the heartland of America who slugged it out on the road together, playing gigs all across the country. These guys were one of the hardest working bands in the music industry. But after years of touring and pushing it to the limit, they had hardly anything to show for it. In fact, they were hitless, and they were $1 million in debt and on the verge of disintegration. But then a weird and wonderful thing happened to these guys. They traveled to another continent to play some shows, and they found out that in one huge country, they were as big as the Beatles. They were shocked. It changed everything virtually overnight. The story of this unconventional international breakout and the song that put them over the top and paved the way in America is next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you ever played your music so loud you blew out your speaker or speakers, you'll dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now and make sure to click on the red button so you always know when our stuff's coming out. We also have a Patreon. Check us out there. There we have other content. I remember I blew out my dad's speaker when I was DJing once. I got in big trouble. You know, the usual path to success for a band involves relentless touring, starting from building a local fan base, expanding regionally, and eventually garnering national attention. At least that's the roadmap you try to follow, or the way it was in the good old days. One of the greatest classic rock bands ever, Cheap Trick, the four-piece outfit who hail from Rockford, Illinois, stuck to this formula diligently. They toured tirelessly for years, striving for that breakthrough moment. But it remained elusive. No matter how many shows they played, they could not break through. That is until they ventured to Tokyo to play at Budokan. And nothing could prepare them for what they would witness there. Everything went crazy. So let's travel back to August of '73. Cheap Trick settled on their very cool band name. So the inspiration struck during a Slade concert when bassist Tom Peterson remarked on Slade's performance. He commented to his bandmates Rick Nielsen and Bunny Carlos they used every Cheap Trick in the book as part of their act. Before they brought in the charisma of Robin Zander, the original lead singer for Cheap Trick was Randy Zeno Hogan. In 1975, when Cheap Trick was still considered a bar band, lead scorcher Rick Nielsen was sitting on a big old stuffed chair. He was listening to the radio when he started to come up with an idea for I Want You to Want Me, the song that would fall flat before it unexpectedly broke the band around the world. So while he was listening to the radio, his father came into the room and turned on the TV. I guess Rick was in the mood for one of those classic black and white westerns featuring character George Gabby Hayes, who was in a lot of cowboy movies from the 30s and the 40s. But instead of a western, the movie that came on was an old romantic flick depicting the 1920s. Now, Rick doesn't remember the title of the movie, but there was a scene where the characters were dressing up for a night on the town. That's what inspired the concept of I Want You to Want Me, to capture the partying spirit of the roaring 20s. And you think about it, we're in the 20s right now. So Rick came up with a line that he added to the middle of the lyrics. I'll shine up my old brown shoes, put on a brand new shirt, hurry home right after work. So after putting on his best studs, the sharp-dressed man goes on a quest to get the object of his desire to have the same desire for him. I Want You to Want Me evolved into a desperate, delusional plea for the reciprocal hunger of another. I Want You to Want Me was originally recorded for their self-titled debut record that came out in '77, but it was scrapped. The band regarded the song as hokey pop is what they called it. They never took it seriously. Even Rick didn't really care about the future of this composition. Since the band performed I Want You to Want Me in their live shows, they brought it back for consideration to include as a cut on their second album, In Color, that was released in late '77. The original version of I Want You to Want Me on the In Color LP was produced by Tom Werman. He was renowned for his work with Ted Nugent and later with Motley Crue. The version of the track on In Color was a big departure for Cheap Trick, though, and it prompted Werman to bring in outside musicians like keyboard player Jai Winding and guitarist Jay Graydon for the recording. Graydon, of course, known for his solo on Steely Dan's Peg. He delivered the guitar solo on this track. It wasn't Rick Nielsen on the original. In Werman's opinion, Graydon was the greatest guitarist that he'd ever worked with. He thought he did a fabulous job on the track. Reminiscing about the recording sessions for I Want You to Want Me, Werman recalled a disagreement with Rick about the arrangement, particularly the piano part. Despite this, he exercised creative freedom, reasoning that as long as the band approved, he could proceed as he wished. To Werman, I Want You to Want Me was kind of an old-time vaudeville burlesque tune, if you will, an old-time dance hall song. Werman distinctly remembers looking backwards at the four band members while they were sitting on the couch observing and asking the band if they were cool with what he was doing. To which Rick responded, "Hey, you're the producer." The original is very strange. The honky-tonk flavored piano parts, and they weren't the only things that made the original version of I Want You to Want Me sound so different. The recording included sardonic finger snapping, and Robin Zander's vocals on the track, they were very uncharacteristic for the blonde frontman. Robin really played up to the campiness of the song on this version, seeming like what Rick Nielsen would later call a woebegone corn poke. Corn poke, I love that. That's got to be Illinois slang. I've never heard of anyone being called that before. It's funny. Despite the country-tinged yearning of the track, I Want You to Want Me was selected as the lead single from In Color, and it went nowhere. It bombed. So when the single flopped, the band dropped I Want You to Want Me from their live set. A year later in 1978, Cheap Trick was in a very precarious position. Despite releasing a string of albums that were praised by critics, Cheap Trick, In Color, and Heaven Tonight, and tirelessly hitting the road for performances, success in the U.S. eluded the band. Their albums failed to sell, leaving Cheap Trick around $1 million in debt. Now, if you factor inflation over more than 40 years, that's a really hefty nut. That's actually around $4 million today. However, amidst their struggles, there was hope for Cheap Trick. Across the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles away from Rockford, Illinois, apparently the band was having tremendous success in the Japanese market. As Alphaville would later sing, they were big in Japan. In Japan, the group had 3 gold albums under their belt, and they also had a series of top 10 hits, including Clock Strikes 10, Surrender, and today's song, I Want You to Want Me. By late April 78, Cheap Trick were headed to the Far East, for their first Japanese tour, primed to revel in the glory of their newly acquired fame. But they had no idea about the frenzy that awaited their arrival. When they landed in Tokyo, 5,000 screaming fans greeted them at Narita International Airport. I felt like the Fab Four. Bob Alford, the official band photographer, vividly recalls the chaos that ensued. He said, and I quote, "It was reminiscent of Beatlemania. Hordes of Japanese fans chased them relentlessly, attempting to tear their clothes off. I remember girls leaning out of speeding taxis, risking life and limb just to snap a photo of these guys. It was nuts." Now, as we further break down this period and this song, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the glasses I always wear. Right now, you can get Zenni's newest offering, IQ Lens. Innovative eye protection for all. Whether you wear prescription glasses or not, helps shield your eyes from harmful UV light, blue light, and infrared exposure. With light-adapting technology, they seamlessly shift between indoors and out with ease. IQ Lens offers eye protection without compromise, engineered for your on-the-go lifestyle. Click on our info button right up here to get yours today, up to 80% off regular retail prices. So Rick Nielsen would open up the Guitar magazine about the trip. He would say, "It was incredibly risky for us to do anything. People would get crushed, diving in front of trains or jumping out of taxis. The hotels were swarmed with thousands of fans crowding the lobbies. If we just looked out the window of our room, it would send them into a frenzy and we'd risk getting kicked out of the hotel." So Cheap Trick had shows scheduled for April 27th in Osaka and April 28th and 29th at Tokyo's Budokan. Of course, Budokan, a prestigious 14,000-seat arena graced by legendary acts like the Beatles and Zeppelin and Deep Purple. Surprisingly, the decision to record a live album, that wasn't the band's idea. It was driven by the label executives. In Japan, CBS Sony was splitting into two companies, is what Bunny Carlos would say. They decided that every time a band on Epic or Columbia came over to Japan, they'd record their show and put out a series of Live at Budokan albums. Bob Dylan and Cheap Trick had the first live albums recorded from Budokan. Budokan, situated in Chiyoda, Tokyo, Japan, began its history as an indoor arena designed for the inaugural Olympic judo competition during the 1964 Summer Olympics. Although its initial focus was on martial arts contests, the arena evolved into one of the globe's most renowned musical performance venues. While it once served as a popular setting for Japanese professional wrestling, it also welcomed a variety of other sporting events, including the 1967 Women's Volleyball World Championship. Now, preparing for their performances at Budokan, Cheap Trick decided to put I Want You to Want Me back on their set list, since they were told that the Japanese audience were crazy about the song. It had been a big hit there. And they also decided to give the fans the super rock charged version of the track, not the original that was, a little different. The no-holds-barred rendition that they preferred to play during their live concerts, even though the crowd was only familiar with the studio version of I Want You to Want Me that was on in color. So actually it was the original that was a hit. It was the group's first time playing in front of a Japanese-speaking audience, so they appreciated any tips that they could get. For example, Robin Zander was advised to speak very slowly when he spoke to the crowd from the stage so that the fans could understand every word. Robin followed that counsel when he introduced I Want You to Want Me in a slow, deliberate style. Very classic, of course. Robin's intro was so good it was left in the recording for the single version of the song and became a signature Robin Zander moment from his career.
I want you to want me.
Robin's between-song patter on stage could seemingly incite the primarily female audience into a frenzy at will. They went bonkers about anything that he said. When Robin sang I Want You to Want Me, the part of the song that made the girls inside Budokan scream with the most emotion, scream the loudest, was the Didn't I See You Crying segment. Tom Peterson described the frenzy as being like young girls at a Hannah Montana concert. Rick Nielsen agreed with his longtime friend and bandmate's example here. Surrounded by thunderous applause and fueled by the ecstatic screams of thousands of devoted fans, Rick and the band found themselves deeply affected by the overwhelming audience reaction. They couldn't believe what they were experiencing. As he said, the crowd's response was absolutely incredible, is what Rick Nielsen said. It was deafeningly loud. It bordered on being frightening. Nearly 46 years later, the buzz of the first Budokan show is still ringing in his head, as if it were yesterday. If you never saw Cheap Trick back in the day, you missed one of rock's most vivacious performers. On stage, lead guitarist Rick Nielsen was akin to a whirlwind cartoon character, like the Tasmanian Devil, man. He had so much passion. He was a force of nature, with his wild, distorted power chords and eccentric antics, often showering the audience with a flurry of guitar picks. He definitely gave the crowd their money's worth, no matter what city he played in, no matter what night it was.
I want
When the live record Cheap Trick at Budokan was released in 1979, the world was engulfed in Cheap Trick delirium. I mean, after years of relentless touring, playing in dingy venues across the states and opening for renowned acts like Kansas and Santana and Kiss and Bebop Deluxe, Cheap Trick, they finally made it big. They'd achieved what once seemed nearly impossible for them: superstardom. Cheap Trick at Budokan became an international sensation. The album has sold more than 3 million copies in the US alone. I mean, not too shabby for a record that was originally not intended to even be released in North America. It doesn't take away from the timeless greatness of the record, but I do need to point out, At Budokan initially stemmed from a performance in Osaka, Japan. Interestingly, they later added live footage that was from Budokan, although the audio, that's from Osaka. Jack Douglas, the supervising engineer for Cheap Trick at Budokan, was the first one to reveal this fact. Jack also pointed out that keen observers noticed a discrepancy. Rick Nielsen's guitar solo in the video, it didn't synchronize perfectly with the footage. Jack Douglas is a prolific producer, engineer, and A&R executive whose first real job was being the janitor at the record plant in New York City, I might add. He was also the person that got Cheap Trick their first record deal after he saw them perform at a bowling alley in Wisconsin. Their first time around, I Want You to Want Me, it couldn't buy airplay. But when it was dropped as a single from Cheap Trick at Budokan, the live energy, executed the way the band always wanted it to be played, truly representing the electricity of Cheap Trick on stage. It was a massive hit. The Rick Nielsen composition, originally misinterpreted as an old-time song from vaudeville days, it was suddenly transformed into one of the hottest songs in the world. The single raced to #1 in many countries, including Belgium, the Netherlands, the Philippines, and of course Japan. Cheap Trick finally got their due in their home country when I Want You to Want Me went to #7 on the Billboard Hot 100. And it did it with Rick Nielsen's guitar solo. And instead of the original that had Jay Graydon's. Now, that had to feel good. For the baseball cap wearing shredder. I love Rick Nielsen. I Want You to Want Me has made appearances in various movies and TV shows. There's Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, The Boss, John Tucker Must Die, Private Parts, Queen's Logic, High Fidelity, Stalker, Friends with Benefits, One Tree Hill, and Californication.
I need you to need me.
You think about it. If it weren't for their performances at Budokan, Cheap Trick may have never been more than an opening act. I mean, they certainly had, or have, headliner talent, but the course they were on before that career-changing trip to Japan was not the path to superstardom. Robin Zander admitted as much. That album saved us from probable obscurity, he said. Even on that first flight to Japan, Cheap Trick traveled like a band that was on the edge of the abyss. I mean, what a breathtaking surprise that must have been to see thousands of rabid fans waiting for them as they pulled into the airport, when they landed in Tokyo. Rick Nielsen said this as a joke. I love this. We flew to Japan crammed in coach, and we flew back home in first class. Classic. Really, the live version of I Want You to Want Me from Cheap Trick at Budokan was a huge hit because of its authenticity. You can't fabricate that kind of raw intensity from a band, and you can't pipe in the unbridled hysteria of the fans that were in attendance at those legendary shows in Osaka and the Budokan Arena. It was as real as it gets. It truly manifested the inexpressible power of a live rock show. Just nothing like it. AI will never be able to compete with that. That live performance from At Budokan captured every ounce of Cheap Trick's spectacular live energy that makes them one of the most vital bands of the rock era. And most importantly, by being big in Japan, it paved their way in America. That's why we have them now. You want me. Leave us a comment about Cheap Trick and Live at Budokan. Is it your favorite live record? What about the energy of I Want You to Want Me? Let's talk about, share your memories of this great band. Let's have a great discussion below. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords down the truth.